Through the Noise with your host, Ernesto Glucksmann.
Okay, hey, thank you for coming on the show. I have Apoorv Bhargava. Did I say it right?
You got it right, Ernesto. Thanks.
You're the CEO of WeaveGrid, CEO and founder of WeaveGrid. Probably best if you let us with like the 30-second, what is it that you guys do? Then if I butchered that process for you.
It's always fascinating to me to hear how people describe the company, because I feel like 10 people will describe it 18 different ways. But at the same time, I'll give the high level summary. So what WeaveGrid does is we work closely with utility companies, energy utility companies, to basically help them predict and manage the impacts of large-scale electrification. So as society increasingly moves towards an electrified transportation future, we're dealing with an electric system that was never built to basically manage this many EVs or electric vehicles at scale. And so we help by developing enterprise-level software for utilities that helps not just predict through machine learning and so forth where the impacts and when the impacts of electric vehicle charging, which is very intensive, are going to be felt on their system, but also we can manage that very intelligently through our software and make it pretty seamless. And by doing so, it helps us save, of course, reduce the cost of charging at the same time for customers. At the same time, we can balance renewable energy using the EVs and a host of other things that I'm sure we'll talk about.
That I was going to say that. That's how I was going to describe your.
Yeah, exactly.
It's this world of the electric grid world is like, some of the regular listeners of the show, they know that it's just like I'm still learning my way and weaving my way into this space. But there's some fundamental things that exist with any electric grid, or I guess when you're shoving electrons down a wire, is that you have to balance the load.
That's right.
Right. The demand side with the generation. If you generate too many electrons, things burn up, stuff happens bad. And if you generate too much demand, that also happens. So it's like the balance is the key, right?
That's exactly right. Just like life, you got to always do things in balance. So the electric grid is a beautiful metaphor for our life. I think I like to think of it as.
And so when you were mentioning sort of this transition, and I was kind of going through some of the numbers, there's, how many electric cars are there on the road now? What, like 1 million something?
Yeah. So it's a good question. So there's about 300 million total cars on the road in America, right? And that's basically about a car per person. And there's we've just hit about 2 million plug-in vehicles. Now, plug-in vehicles includes both full battery electric vehicles, but also what are known as plug-in hybrids. Plug-in hybrids, I used to drive one previously. Plug-in hybrids have a smaller battery, and they also have a gas tank. And so that allows you to get maybe anywhere between 25 to 50 miles, 60 miles on the battery. And so it kind of takes care of about 95% of your needs. And then the gas tank allows you to go drive on road trips and things like that. But at this point, I think we're definitely seeing a pretty strong tipping point where you're seeing definitely more than 50% full battery electric vehicles.
What do you mean 50% full battery? Like,
what I mean is like more than 50% of that 2 million is probably full battery electric vehicles.
Okay, right. And when you look at like how many of those vehicles in total, and if anybody's been paying attention to Tesla alone, they're building some factories that each could, in theory, produce 1 million vehicles a year coming out, right? So some point pretty soon, this 2 million on the road is going to get like 1 million a year more, right? And so
at least. I mean, I think this year, fingers crossed, I think we're going to hit about 500,000 in new sales of electric vehicles. And the interesting thing when you look at the history of it is that it's really been growing exponentially, and that we're at the beginning of that exponential growth curve.
That kind of inflection point, right?
That inflection point. Yeah.
I should also shout some of your street cred. I mean, you've been in, you've gone to Stanford, you have an MBA, but you have electrical sciences, like engine and energy sciences, a master's in energy science.
Yeah, my parents joke that the only thing left to do now at this point is get a PhD, and they're kind of worried that I'm going to go do that at some point. No, I've unfortunately or fortunately enjoyed school too much. But yeah, I have an MBA from Stanford, as well as an MS in energy and resources.
And you work for companies like Opower that does
Yeah.
like analytics on power generation. Boston Consulting Group does a lot. And you've worked in this space for a long time, right?
I've worked in this sector my entire career. Yeah, I've actually been fascinated by energy, climate change, all of this for pretty much my whole life. And I'm not joking. Beyond my professional life, like even when I was a kid, I was like really interested in energy and oil and all of that. And so my journey has been it's been a long journey getting here and starting a company, and now kind of watching that grow. But it's been a fun transition to culmination of all my different experiences and bringing it together to starting this.
And so I sort of bring that up because I tend to jump around on my show a lot, but I want to pinpoint that you referenced in one of the areas, like one of the studies, I guess from the Boston Consulting Group, mentioned that, I mean, as we're talking about the amount of cars that are coming on the utility, that the utilities need to spend somewhere between $1,700 to $5,000 per car in upgrading the existing infrastructure, because it seems to me, based on what happened in Texas last year's winter, we have kind of a brittle grid. We have an old, it's somewhat distributed. It's run by some fiefdoms, but it's not quite ready. And if the electric company's got to spend $1,000 or more per car that comes on, this is going to be huge challenge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of my bookshelves in my background back there is an entire bookshelf dedicated to just like books on energy and climate and the grid and stuff like that. But I think one of the things I like to take a step back and just say, first and foremost, the electric grid is one of the most incredible machines that we have in the world, hands down. I think it was the National Academy of Engineering or Sciences, I forget which one, that said that the electric grid was like the invention of the 20th century. And it's true. Like we literally, like the fact that we're sitting here having this conversation, all of that is enabled by power, right? And we're power powers the internet powers this conversation. And so the electrical grid in the last 120 years of its existence has done unbelievable things from a development and innovation perspective. And at the same time, it has been 120 years of this system kind of existing and evolving. And frankly, we're at this really interesting tipping point where now you're taking this independent system of electricity and this independent system of transportation, something that has traditionally been fueled by gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, whatever. And you're taking these two very independent systems and very quickly smushing them together or converging them or weaving them, as you would like to think of it, right? And so the way that we even came to the name is like we're literally weaving together these two sectors. We're weaving together transportation and energy. And so to your specific point around that study, I mean, that's actually only a study at low penetration rates of EVs. Like as it gets higher and higher, the cost to the system, if not managed well, could actually grow much higher. And I think the problem is we have a tendency to do two things as human beings, as we're learning through COVID. One, we don't think in end-to-end systems. We're not trained to think in a systems-oriented way. We have a tendency to kind of glom onto like the shiny thing, the technology, the policy, whatever that like speaks to us first and foremost, and not think about the holistic picture. And I think the second thing, so sorry, I was saying systems thinking. The second thing is like, we don't think well exponentially. So one of the big things that's happening with EVs, right, is like they're just growing so quickly and are going to continue growing faster. I mean, you mentioned the Tesla factory is putting out 1 million vehicles. But I mean, if you look across the world, even the country, I mean, there's probably about $500 billion worth of expenditures that every automaker combined is going to make. Like $500 billion, in the next few years on electrification. That's wild. And so the compounding effects are going to lead to this exponential growth curve. And that exponential growth curve is just not something that our system that we've designed to deal with and to supply us with electricity was ever built for, right? And so how you break that down into different components, how you balance it, how you think about which pieces are first and foremost most fragile, and conversely, how you can actually do something really valuable with those vehicles and turn them into enhanced grid resiliency. That's the kind of thinking that we're really trying to do here at WeaveGrid.
Hey, I'm going to pause you real quick. All right. So let me ask you this question, given like how long you've been in this space. Like, if you were to characterize how prepared we are for this sort of escalation curve, how would you do that? Like, well, 1 to 5, where are we on a scale? I mean, you pick the scale. You tell me. Yeah. Are we like, I have this analogy that no one puts a stoplight at a corner until somebody gets hit by a car in our world, right? We react when something bad happens pretty aggressively, but we don't seem to think, oh, hey, somebody could act, this is a bad corner, we should probably put the light in.
I think we're in this really, really interesting moment where growth is happening, and it's happening really quickly, but we haven't hit a danger zone yet. So I think it is now, it is in this moment that policymakers, utilities, automakers, whoever, can actually start thinking critically about what happens as that penetration keeps growing. So as I just saw, I think I was just looking at the August sales here in California, or maybe it was September sales, but it's like California new cars sales of plug-in vehicles were, I think, 12 or 13%. And total cars on the road in California, it's still a small percentage of total cars in the road that are electric vehicles, but it's growing, and it's growing really quickly. And so are we prepared? If 5 was fully prepared and 1 is not prepared, I would say we're probably at a 2. But I also think that it isn't too late yet. And that's the good thing. I think the bigger challenge to both systems, right, is like you're taking a 120-year-old automotive system as well, and you're saying, hey, you got to electrify really quickly. And like that's not something they're used to doing either. So they're trying to grapple with all of that. You're also saying you've got to move to the automotive industry is also dealing with its own issues around autonomous vehicles and so forth. And how do we want to get there to that future? On the renewables and the other parts of the utility side, you've got utilities being pushed to go further and faster into renewables and clean energy, which absolutely we need to be doing as well. So how do they grapple with that? And then you've got this added interesting application of electrification. I think if you're reading like a consulting report or something, it's easy to say, well, this is all perfect, and like renewables are going to perfectly balance the electric vehicles are going to perfectly balance renewables, and everything's going to be perfect. How you actually execute on that is really hard. And I think that's the thing that we're trying to help do, because it's one thing to write reports. It's another thing to actually like really go out there and do it. And I think in particular, the reason I say that is because for a lot of these entities, utilities and automakers, they're really good at what they do and have been. And now it's like they're dealing with like unprecedented change in a time scale that they're not used to, right? You think about planning horizons at automotive companies, you think about planning horizons at utilities, it's 10, 15, 20, 30, 40-year horizons sometimes.
It's not investor friendly, by the way. It's not VC friendly. VCs don't go, what 10 years from now to help you invest in a new power plant here or something electric? Yeah. It's not, that's a different conversation, right?
Yeah, there's elements to that I could speak to for sure. I mean, I don't think VCs rightfully should be investing in utilities or creating utilities, but at the same time, like, why we're a venture-backed company is because I do think that there is just a huge amount of change that's coming about these industries, and that's where you can actually go create really transformative technologies that help these sectors accelerate their own change and advance. And so that is venture backable. Perhaps it isn't building a new power plant, but it is to build the software that enables all of that to happen.
Gotcha. Hold on one second. Okay. So I do want to switch gears a little bit onto your company particular product and platform. Can you give us a little bit of an overview? Okay, we have a somewhat of a brittle electric grid. They're making changes. They're certainly capable. It's the right times to start thinking about it, but time's ticking, right? So where does your platform, which is incorporates machine learning, where does that fit into this particular space?
Yeah. I mean, the reason why you want to think about machine learning in the first place, right, is that ultimately, like, what it provides is predictability in a system, or in a data system particularly, where there is very little understanding of what the future might entail. So you want to do it because you think you can predict something better than existing human predictions or existing sort of heuristics are allowed, can help you do so. I think one of the most interesting things about the electrification question is that we're going from a world of utilities never having to think about transportation behavior and how that behavior impacts their grid. And so I think one of the power of what we're trying to do is basically this. We're trying to say, how can we leverage data about how people drive and hence charge, and use that to then understand how that charging is going to shape both the demand curve, and go down even further and say, how does it actually impact said brittle system, right? Across a series of different assets and components. So not just saying, how does it impact the whole demand shape, which is interesting and important, but frankly, like, not that relevant today. What is much more relevant is, how does this impact the actual system and the system components that utilities have to own and operate and maintain over 20, 30, 40 years? Okay, now that you understand something because you're able to predict it, right, using data, can we leverage more data, right, whether from the utility, whether from the charging, whether from the automakers, whether from the drivers, whatever, to not just understand what's happening with charging, right, which is the first component of what we do, but then it's to actually say, can I shape that charging behavior? Because ultimately, you know, as an EV driver, all you really want to do is you want to go home, you want to plug in your car. It's kind of like your cell phone. You want to go home, you want to plug in your car, and you just want it to charge by the end of the night. Yeah, you want to make sure that it has enough juice that in the middle of the night, if you need to run to the grocery store, or if you need to run to, grab something from your office because you forgot it or whatever, like, you need to have enough juice for that. But generally, we're going into a world where every car has about 300 miles of range, and you're going to only drive anywhere between 30 to 50 miles a day, even in a post-COVID world, perhaps, where we are going back to the office every day. So given that sort of situation, it just means that we have to be able to manage that charging, that is intelligently manage that charging, such that it does, of course, satisfy the customer needs. I think that's the first and foremost thing. You always, always, always want to make sure the customer's needs are met. But at the same time, can we live in a world where we also provide customers the cheapest possible charging, the cleanest possible charging, and do that all in an automated way? And at the same time, for the utility's sake, are able to do all of that whilst balancing that system and ensuring that, like, end to end in the system, we're actually not creating extra costs. Because back to that study you talked about, you could hit a world where every EV imposes, again, even relatively low penetration rates, imposes thousands of dollars worth of costs, or you could live in a world where it's much, much, much lower. And I think that's the vision that we have, which is like, our software and our ability to predict and then manage is very much a data-centric approach, but it's super valuable for utility because it actually can resolve the uncertainties that are existing and they're very quickly creeping up with all these people starting to go electric. And see, it doesn't matter when it's like 1%, 2%, 3%, even 5%, it may not matter a ton. But once you start hitting that 10%, 15%, and again, that number will creep up so quickly because of the exponential growth curve. The next thing you know, you're used to using planning models that were built, frankly, back in the 80s. And the most exciting load at that time in a customer's house was an air conditioning unit. Well, nothing's really changed since then. And so how can you manage what is about to become the largest load in the household by far? Every electric car is approximately 2 households worth at peak. So an average American home peaks out at anywhere between I'm going to use this unit called kilowatts, anywhere between 3 to 5 kilowatts. And an average electric vehicle can charge anywhere between 7 to 15 kilowatts at home. So that's an immense amount of power that you're adding onto the system, even if only for short bursts of time.
Right. So I'm envisioning like, okay, you drive your car back from work, you plug it in, that's peak hours. Okay, you want it to charge a little bit if you need to go to the grocery store suddenly, right, from your long drive commute, if you need the juice. But if you have a bunch of it already in there, maybe you can wait until it's 9, 10, 11 p.m. to then take advantage. Now, who's going to optimize that way of charging? That's you guys. Us. So it's not the car manufacturers necessarily.
We work together with all of those entities, but the problem is that like neither the utility nor the car manufacturer has like a perfect sense of what time you need to optimize that charging such that it does balance the whole system out. And part of the reason behind that is that it's changing so quickly on every component of the grid. Like utilities have a very good understanding of what's happening holistically. But when you get down to the real sort of like neighborhood level, it's much harder to understand because there's just not enough monitoring. There's not enough sensors. There's not enough of all of that. And automakers have definitely built in the capacity, or charger companies have built in the capacity such that you can either tell your car or your charger box, hey, I want to charge at 9 p.m., 10 p.m., whatever. So they can do that. It's all in there. The question is, how do you make that optimum decision? Because 9 or 10 p.m. one day may not be good. The next day it might be 11 or 12. So how do you make that decision?
It's really hot.
Yeah,
or whatever.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think that the problem is like we make these decisions like as consumers, neither do we frankly want the cognitive burden of making those decisions day by day.
No, I can tell you as a dad, I don't have time.
Yeah, right. I don't have time for that, right?
No
like all I want to do is I want to go home, plug in my car, and I can tell you as an energy nerd, right. I don't want to think about that. Like I don't want to think about that. I have a smart thermostat, and like I don't think about like what setting it's on. I just wanted to cool my house. I wanted to heat my house. That's it. So I think the big thing for us is like, how do you remove that cognitive burden for drivers and delight drivers, give them the experience and the elements that they want to see, because remember, this is a really big behavioral shift moment for drivers. Like if you currently drive an internal combustion engine vehicle, you're used to thinking, okay, look, when my car comes down to close to zero, that's when I'm going to go to the gas station down the road and fill up there. Now, you mentioned you live in Fairfax. I mean, like now you really are going to think about your diminished energy bill a lot more if you drive an EV, because you're going to go home and you're going to plug it in every night, just like you plug in your iPhone. And so I think that's the thing that is a huge behavioral shift. And similar to plugging in your iPhone, you don't sit around and say, okay, well, how do I optimize my iPhone's charging such that it's fully charged by the end of the morning? It's like, no, I just go home, I plug it in, like it does it. It does do some optimization, by the way. Even your iPhone does some optimization in the background, such that the battery is safe, such that like, it's fully charged by the end of the night, all of those things. It's just that we can do the same, but for a much, much bigger battery and also resolve the issue for the utility.
Okay, but as a startup, are you like, I mean, this sounds like you're balancing interest of like several stakeholders.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're trying to like, and perhaps for each stakeholder, the difference is not, or the view you express, like they don't have full view, but perhaps the difference for each stakeholder is not quite there yet to make a wholehearted effort into making a standard or whatever. But you're coming in there with a tool, right? And trying to get that put together. Now, are you targeting consumers? Probably not, right? I would assume you're talking like a fleet. Like, is there a company that has all electric vehicles? That seems like a larger load that suddenly has to be balanced.
So, I'm my Twitter personality and my real personality are not that different. I'm very fond of hot takes. And my hot take is that there aren't actually that many fleets with all electric vehicles. The biggest fleet are all of us who drive EVs.
Right.
There's 2 million electric vehicles on the road, and like barely maybe 1% of them are actually fleet vehicles. So I actually think, so for us, we don't go direct to consumer. We go through the partners that we work with. We work with utilities, we work with automakers. Those are our partners, and they offer these programs to their electric vehicle owners, right? What's the point of me going and creating a
No.
new customer relationship when there's already trusted brands on both sides that allow them to do so?
Is that what your relationship with Dominion? Because I saw that you had a relationship with Dominion, or that you were in a cohort of some program with Dominion Energy.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Yeah, so we did an innovation program with Dominion Energy. They're really excited about what we're doing, and really I think they're also very focused on electrification as one of their core sort of pillars for the future. And yeah, it's been really cool. I got to meet a bunch of their senior leadership, including a lot of their executive team. And I think everyone's really, really excited about what we're up to. It's been a really awesome experience getting to know them and their team and how they're viewing the sort of electric future. But I think every utility is asking the same question, right? Which is like, how do I both create a great customer experience? How do I both increase my sort of my sales, my revenue, my load, as it's known in the utility sector, and at the same time, of course, maintain the cost and reliability and cleanliness of my grid? And like, that's really what the sort of holy grail, right? If you can do all that, then that's awesome. And we're trying to help them do that. So yeah, I think we don't have a direct to consumer model yet. We definitely have more of a partnership driven model. But back to your actual question earlier, it is a wild bet that we can wrangle these complex stakeholder dynamics. And like, the reality is that as much as we're a technology company, we're also a stakeholder company, which is we are a systems solution to a systems problem. And like, perhaps because I'm a little jaded by some parts of Silicon Valley, I just don't think that like the solution to every systems problem is to say, hey, here's my cool technology, I'm going to drop it in and magically things will happen. You do have to work with the existing stakeholders. You do have to work with the existing incumbents, and you have to find a way to bring all those pieces together. We have a policy team. We're a small company, and yet we already have a policy team. We have a policy team that talks to regulators, educates them on how the market is changing and evolving. These are regulated monopolies we work with, right? So like, of course, like what their regulators say is really important to them and the decisions that they make. So we kind of think end to end, like, what do the regulators say, desire, looking towards in the future? And then how does that flow all the way down to the engineering decisions that last back-end engineer on my team is making, right? And that there is a real flow through that happens from top to bottom there. And I think that's really important to understand.
And I think that's the more compelling. I mean, you're not making another social media app for the iPhone here. Okay. We're not,
right.
This is a different ball game. And the scales that exist here is what's potentially, I would assume, really intriguing to your investors, right?
That's right.
As part of this process. But you have to work with the customers or the potential customers, the energy companies, the car manufacturers, these sort of multi-stakeholder environments, which I think in the past maybe have shied away some of the Silicon Valley money, right? Because they're like, oh, that looks too complicated.
Totally.
Well,
it's both complicated, and I think like a lot of Silicon Valley companies haven't had the requisite empathy, which is for those companies. I mean, ultimately, like, if you're dealing with, we're in an accelerator with Ford right now. I mean, like, if you're dealing with somebody of the sort of grandeur and like institutional knowledge of Ford, just saying like, look, I'm smarter than you because I have 3 software engineers.
That's not going to work.
It's not going to work. And like,
like
that's not a smart way to go,
No.
And I think it goes and applies exactly the same for us with our utility partners as well. Like, I have a deep amount of respect for the fact that they keep our power on, 99.8% of the time, or 99.999% of the time, or whatever their metrics are. Like, that's a really hard job. That's a really, really hard job.
It's really easy to take for granted. Let me tell you.
We do take it for granted. I mean, we do. Easy. All of us do. Right?
It's magic. We put something in the wall and we can play a video game. Like, I mean, it's just magic, right?
That is exactly right.
And when you look into what it actually takes to get it there, it's just astounding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to listen, right? I have to listen carefully.
It's interesting to me, which is like, for all of our, like, we've gotten so far down the development chain to some extent that we sometimes forget that like everything from the way we drive our cars to the way that we power our homes is done in this like somewhat incredible way of like something is either extracted or sun is used to like, have photons jump out of a solar panel to do this thing. I mean, it's unbelievable when you think about the end-to-end supply chain. And so I really don't think that we've done a good job in Silicon Valley, especially often, of like respecting how much technology and how much innovation has happened to get us to this point in some of these heavy industries that have so much institutional history and knowledge. So my question then to them is often like, what are the things that we can do well? What are the core competencies we do have that we can uniquely bring to you and resolve and help you accelerate sort of the innovation that you already are undertaking? That's how I often think about it.
Right. And then at that point, I mean, I think part of it is just sort of the evolution of Silicon Valley anyway. Like we had a bunch of kids, engineers had new toys that they only knew how to code and put together. And so they thought they could solve all the problems by just thinking about it themselves. But the reality is you got to get close to these challenges, right? I mean, you can look at Tesla, that making a car, making AI for Tesla, it's not that easy. And it's taking them a long time to work on it, right? And so I commend you, for stepping into this space, but I think you're in the right space because, these utilities and the car companies, if we don't, it's not, like you said, it's not an immediate problem now, but if you don't work proactively, it's going to reach a problem that it's a real problem. And if you're just starting at that point to address it,
yeah, it's too late.
You're done, right? And I think some of the legacy automakers that are now struggling to catch up, even with Tesla. Yes, I guess I'm a Tesla fanboy at this point, the way I just said that, right? But it's like they're waking up to that real reality that they need to shift billions of dollars in assets to change just on making the car, nevertheless changing the grid, the electric grid to deal with this, right?
Yeah,
while continuously serving it, while continuously serving the customer base that they have, right?
Right.
This is huge transition, right? So one question for you, since you've been in this space, how would you characterize these types of conversations in your early years when you just got out of Stanford to where we are right now? How do you feel about it?
When I graduated graduate school in 2017,
you had a few years under your belt. Like, let's add some actual real experience out of Stanford, right?
Yeah.
Not totally, right out of college.
Totally. I mean, like, it's funny, when I got out of college back then, like the shale boom was picking up, and like all my classmates, I was a chemical engineer by training, a chemical engineer and energy economist. So all my friends were going into oil, and I was probably one of the very few people in a chemical engineering class, that too in Houston, that did not go into oil. And definitely a lot of raised eyebrows. What the hell are you doing? But coming out of grad school many years later, I think the interesting thing was we're at this fascinating point as an industry, as a society, where we had orange skies in San Francisco last year. We've had floods, we've had wildfires, we've had so many different things, hurricanes. I think climate and the questions around climate change have become so much more pressing, as has, of course, the top-down regulation and policies that governments are setting. So now there's actually just a much heavier, larger, whatever you want to call it, conversation around this category of ESG. And then from there, as that kind of flows down from the public markets into the private investing side, a bigger and bigger sort of interest in climate tech. Those two things are very related. I'm a person who saw clean tech 1.0. We can call it 1.0, we can call it climate tech 1.0, we can call it whatever we want. All these names and terms keep changing so much. But the reality is, like, even starting a company in 2017, 2018, people didn't want to talk to you about clean tech. People didn't want to talk to you about climate. At that time, the closest thing you could get to was talk about autonomous vehicles. And maybe then people would actually get interested. But at that point, you said the words, I want to build software for utilities. People were like, you're nuts. What are you talking about? And there were so many VC conversations I had where folks were like, look, you're clearly smart. Why don't you go do something better? I was like, I really think you don't seem to understand. Like, this is an opportunity where we can have massive impact. 60% of emissions in this country come from a combination of transportation and energy. And it's electricity in particular. And it's like, you can go have massive impact. Oh, and by the way, these are two of the largest industries in the world. so we can also create a really big company. But it was amazing. Like the first year, we just didn't really, a lot of people were just like, no, I don't think this makes a ton of sense. So it's funny in hindsight now, looking back at that, to see the industry shift so much. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad that people are finally figuring out that climate is a space worth investing in, and that there's a ton of technology companies that can create immense value and immense impact in it. But it's taken its time to get there.
Right, but I think after some, well, when you're starting a startup company of any type, you're looking for a problem you can solve in a compelling way with a compelling price, and that you have access to, and trying to get close to the problem that you think you can solve, right? Could be a decade of effort to get there, right? But
exactly.
The key to all that is also the market, like the bubbling up from a marketplace, the pressure that the marketplace is feeling. It's not like it doesn't, regulation is important. I'm not saying it's not, the changes in just, political positioning, that's all fine. But if there's an underlying market pressure that is coming and keeps coming, and I don't want to even go there on the dark side of things, but there is, right? And so it's a waiting game probably for a lot of companies like you guys, where you're like, we've been working on this for a while, nobody's really picking up the phone quite yet. Okay, I'll check in with you next quarter, because at some point it's going to hit hard, and you're going to have to move faster, and then there's going to be another mad scramble, web 3.0 acquisition, it's going to, so
it's so interesting you say that. Yeah, it was. I mean, look, there is no doubt that all of this. I am a deep believer that like every company, every startup has an element of luck that comes from timing in their success. And I think for the vast majority of companies that don't succeed, there's definitely a timing component into the fact that they don't succeed. But John, my co-founder, he was wrapping up his PhD at Stanford when we met. And John is a Tesla alum. As you mentioned, I'm an Opower alum. I think the two of us, brought two very different perspectives, but at the same time, a shared vision of what we thought was going to be the problem. Underlying our belief, more than anything, was the fact that we thought the timing was right for the fact that this inflection was finally bound to happen, this electrification inflection. And was it not? If we didn't think that, we honestly weren't going to start this. Like, we are both, I think, he'll probably say so even louder than I would, but like, we're both kind of reluctant founders. Like, I think we both we're okay starting a company. We were excited to do something that made an impact, but I don't think we necessarily said to ourselves, what would be really great? Let's go start a company so we can go just slog away for the next decade of our lives. If there isn't something that's also underlying and driving this growth. And I think particularly if you're building a venture-backed company, you do need to also somewhat look for and be savvy about the inflections that are bound to happen. Because that's what drives that sort of that hockey stick-esque return, and also the hockey stick-esque growth that you need to satisfy venture capitalists. But I think that for that reason, there are a lot of companies that raise venture capital that shouldn't be raising venture capital, because that's just never going to happen. But yeah, for us, that was a big part of it. In 2017, 18, we kind of looked at the market and we said, look, EVs are coming, whether it's in the next 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, they're coming. And this is just not a solution that we're seeing at all in the market. Do we have it within us to both do we have it within us both to go, of course, develop the technology, develop the idea, but then very importantly, raise the capital to build the team to go do that? Like, it's not like John and I are sitting around coding every day anymore, right? Like, that's just not what we do. We have amazing people from Google, Facebook, Slack, you name it, who are building our software. And then we have amazing people on the other side from a lot of utilities, from a lot of energy companies selling that. And then we have amazing people, going and educating regulators and so forth, and like why this is such an important problem. So our question was, is the timing right? is there a big enough problem? Can we raise capital? Can we hire incredible people? And can we kickstart this sort of virtuous cycle that needs to happen to actually drive a startup? And yeah, I think so far, I'm actually going to knock on my table right now. Knock on wood. So far, so good.
I think that first Series A round that you got, that's a good indicator that the time is
Yeah.
right, you know?
I think money's always a good sign, but you
Right.
also got to keep executing using that money well. So
exactly, delivering on that. And I
Delivering
want
on
to
that.
keep going with the further questions about machine learning, but Mr. Bhargava, thanks, man. That was great. I thank you for giving me a little viewpoint from where you are and your mindset on this.
Absolutely.
And WeaveGrid, if there's somebody that works in utilities, I know there are that listen to the show. Where can they find out a little bit more about your platform and some of the projects you're working on?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just look on our website, weavegrid.com. But also feel free to reach out to me or to anybody else on my team. It's pretty straightforward. It's my first name at weavegrid.com. And if I'm not the right person, then I'll redirect you to the right person on our team. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to be on the show. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome.
Really
and
enjoyed it.
let's do this again. I think your journey is just really, I mean, it's funny. You've been working at this for a long time, but for me, it feels like it's just about to begin for you, like the real next level of it. Right. And so that's kind of how it works. Right.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it may not be cool nowadays to say that, but there's a great quote from Jeff Bezos where he says, like, every day is day one and every day feels like day one. So I think it is, if we're trying to tackle this problem of climate change as well, I think we've still got so much room to grow and so much to do. So, I think we're just getting started.
Awesome. Thank you and take care. And thank you guys for listening. And I appreciate the few of you that are starting to pick up on the YouTube channel. I know it's not the best.
I'll make sure we promote it.
Yes, please do. Please do. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Ernesto.
For more episodes of Through the Noise, go to throughthenoise.us.